6. The best that Galoshes brought. Early the next morning, before the clerk was out of bed, someone tapped on his door. In walked his neighbor, a young theological student who lived on the same floor. "Lend me your galoshes," he requested. "It is very wet in the garden, but the sun is shining so gloriously that I'd like to smoke a pipeful down there." He pulled on the galoshes and went out into the garden, where there was one plum tree and a pear tree. But even a little garden like this one is a precious thing in Copenhagen. It was only 6 o'clock as the student walked up and down the path. He heard the horn of a stagecoach in the street. "Oh, to travel," he exclaimed. "That's the most pleasant thing in the world. It's the great goal of all my dreams. If only I could travel, I'm sure that this restlessness within me would be stilled. But it must be far, far away. How I should like to see beautiful Switzerland, to tour Italy, and..." Fortunately, the galoshes began to function at once, or he might have traveled entirely too much to suit him or to please us. Travel he did. He was high up in Switzerland, tightly packed in diligence with 8 other travelers. He had a pain in his head. His neck felt tired, and the blood had ceased to circulate in his legs. His feet were swollen, and his heavy boots hurt him. He was half awake and half asleep. In his right hand pocket he had his letter of credit. In his left hand pocket he had his passport, and soon into his little bag inside his breast pocket he had a few gold pieces. Every time he dozed off, he dreamed that he had lost one or another of these things. Starting feverishly awake, his first movement would be to trace with his hand a triangle from right to left, and up to his breast to feel whether his treasures were still there. Umbrellas, hats, and walking sticks swung in the net above him and almost spoiled the magnificent view. As he glanced out the window, his heart sang. As at least one poet has sung in Switzerland, these are yet unpublished words. His view is as fine as a view can be. Mount Blanc is sublime beyond a doubt, and the traveler's life is the life for me, but only as long as my money holds out. Vast, severe, and somber was the whole landscape around him. The pine woods looked like patches of heather on the high cliffs whose summits were lost in fog and cloud. Snow began to fall and the cold wind blew. "Ah," he sighed, "if only we were on the other side of the Alps. Then it would be summer weather and I could get some money on my letter of credit. Worrying about my finances spoils all my enjoyment of Switzerland. Oh, if only I were on the other side." And there he was on the other side, in the middle of Italy, between Florence and Rome. Before him lay Lake Thrasmene. In the evening light it looked like a sheet of flaming gold among the dark blue hills. Here, where Hannibal beat Flaminius, the grapevines clung peacefully to each other with their green tendrils. Pretty little half-clothed children tended a herd of coal-black pigs under a fragrant clump of laurels by the roadside, and if we could paint the scene in its true colors, all would exclaim, "Glorious Italy!" But neither the student nor his companions in the stagecoach made any such exclamation. Poisonous flies and gnats swarmed into the coach by the thousands. In vain the travelers tried to beat them off with myrtle branches. The flies stung just the same. There was not a passenger whose face was not puffed and spotted with bites. The poor horses looked like carcasses. The flies made life miserable for them, and it only brought them a momentary relief when the coachman got down and scraped off the swarms of the insects that settled upon them. Once the sun went down, an icy chill fell upon everything. It wasn't at all pleasant. However, the hills and clouds took on that wonderful green tint, so clear and so shining. Yes, go and see for yourself. That is far better than to read about it. It was a lovely sight, and the travelers thought so too, but their stomachs were empty. their bodies exhausted, and every thought in their heads was directed toward a lodging for the night. But where would they lodge? They watched the road ahead, far more attentively than they did the splendid view. Their road ran through an olive grove, and the student could fancy that he was at home, passing through a wood of gnarled willow trees. And there stood a lonely inn. A band of crippled beggars were camping outside, and their liveliest among them looked like the eldest son of Famine, who had just come of age. The rest either were blind or so lame that they crawled about on their hands, or had withered arms and hands without any fingers. Here really was a misery in rags. Excellenza miserable, probably butchered the hell out of that. Anyway, they groaned and stretched forth their crippled limbs. The hostess herself went barefoot, with uncombed hair and an unwashed blouse. She received her guests. The doors were hinged with string. Half of the bricks of the floors had been put to other use. Bats flew about the ceiling, and the smell. It were better to have supper in the stable, one traveler maintained. There one at least knows what he is breathing. The windows were open to let a little fresh air come inside, but swifter than the air came those withered arms and that perpetual whine, miserabile excellenza. On the walls were many inscriptions, and half of them had little good to say for La Bella Italia. Supper was served. Supper was a watery soup flavored with pepper and rancid oil. This same oil was the better part of the salad. Dubious eggs and roasted coxcombs were the best dishes, and even the wine was distasteful. It was a frightful collation. That night the trunks were piled against the door, and one of the travelers mounted guard while the others slept. The student stood the first guard mount. How close it was in there! The heat was overpowering. The gnats droned and stabbed, and outside the miserabili whined in their dreams. Traveling, said the student, would be all very well if one had no body. Oh, if only the body could rest while the spirit flies on without it. Wherever I go, there is some lack that I feel in my heart. There is always something better than the present that I desire. Yes, something better, the best of all. But what is it, and where shall I find it? Down deep in my heart I know what I want. I want to reach a happy goal, the happiest goal of all. As soon as the words were said, he found himself back in his home. Long white curtains draped the windows, and in the middle of the floor a black coffin stood. In this he lay sleeping the quiet sleep of death. His wish was fulfilled, his body was at rest, and his spirit was free to travel. Call no man happy until he rests in his grave, said Solon, and here his words proved true again. Every corpse is a sphinx of immortality. The sphinx in this black casket that confronts us could say no more than the living man had written 2 days before. Stern death, your silence has aroused my fears. Shall not my soul up Jacob's ladder pass, or shall your stone wait me throughout the years, and I rise only in the graveyard grass? Our deepest grief escapes the world's sad eye. You who are lonely to the very last, a heavier burden on your heart must lie than all the earth upon your coffin cast. 2 figures moved about the room. We know them both. Those 2 who had bent over the dead man were Dame Care and Fortune's minion. Now, said Care, you can see what happiness your galoshes have brought through mankind. They have at least brought everlasting rest to him who here lies sleeping, said Fortune's minion. Oh no, said Care. He went of his own free will. He was not called away. His spiritual power was not strong enough to undertake the glorious task for which he is destined. I shall do him a favor. She took the galoshes from his feet. Then the sleep of death was ended, and the student awakened to life again. Care vanished, and she took the galoshes along with her, for she probably regarded them as her own property.